Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining the 5th live chat in our 2020 series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. My name is Jessica Soul and I am the Recruitment Director with the Fellowship, and I will be your moderator for today's chat. Now, the 2020 series of the chat series is an opportunity to hear from fellows and ask them your questions. All the chats, including this one, are recorded and made available on our website for on-demand viewing, and we will send you, everyone who's registered for this chat, a link to watch that chat on demand tomorrow as well. Now, the 2020 chat series features one chat every month of the app season. Today's topic is a day in the life. What's it like to be a fellow? There will be one more chat next month before the application closes on November 1st. We encourage you to use these chats as a resource as you put together your STPF application. During today's chat, we will focus on questions related to the chat theme, and we will try to answer as many as possible. Questions might be answered by the panel or via the chat box. You can submit questions via chat at any time by clicking the question box as shown on the slide now and typing your question there. In your message, you can indicate which person or people the question is directed to. All right, without further ado, I would like to introduce our fellows who are joining me today. Our fellows are Andrea Stathopoulos, John Hale, and Terence Mosley to share their experiences of what it's like to be a fellow. Andrea Stathopoulos is a neuroscientist and a current executive branch fellow at the National Science Foundation in the Office of the Assistant Director in the Directorate of Mathematical and Physical Sciences. Before coming to the DC area, Andrea was a visiting professor of physiology at Wittenberg University, where she taught biology and advised students. She received her PhD from Florida State University, where she collaborated with mathematical modelers on how the brain regulates female reproductive hormones. And while there, she was instrumental in the revival of the Graduate Women in Science organization and participated often in STEM outreach in the community. Her big science policy dreams are to see more women in science as both researchers and subjects and to improve public science literacy. Terence Mosley is also a current executive branch fellow, assigned to the Department of Energy's Building Technologies Office. Originally from Jackson, Mississippi, Mr. Mosley received his bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Southern University and his master's in mechanical engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. As a fellow, Terence works with the chief architect of the Building Technologies Office in furthering the research, public communication, strategic plans, goals, and services of key customer-facing programs of the Residential Buildings Integration Public Programs Office. He is also an entrepreneur with 10 years of experience as the owner and operator of a residential construction firm specializing in home renovations and remodels. And prior to that, he served 20 years as a regional engineering manager for General Motors and Delphi Automotive Systems. He's worked on implementing many STEM programs for women and minorities and has mentored many graduate students through programs like the GEM Fellowship and FIRST Robotics. He was honored with a Black Engineer of the Year Special Recognition Award for his efforts at increasing the diversity of the future STEM pipeline. And our third panelist today is John Hale, currently an Executive Branch Fellow in the Department of State in the Office of Japan Affairs. Previously, John served as a AAAS Congressional Fellow in the Office of Representative Chrissy Houlihan. John is a planetary scientist with experience in space weather, magnetospheric modeling, data analysis, and high performance computing. His graduate work at the Georgia Institute of Technology involves studying Pluto's interaction with the solar wind in preparation for the flyby of NASA's New Horizons mission, as well as simulating the plasma environment surrounding Jupiter's moon, Europa. After completing his doctorate, John received an NRC Research Assistantship Program Fellowship to do space weather modeling at the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory in D.C. In addition to his academic interests, John is involved in public and governmental outreach, sitting on the Federal Relations Subcommittee of the American Astronomical Society's Division for Planetary Sciences. Thank you all very much for joining us today. And so, as I mentioned, the theme for today's chat is, what's it like to be a fellow? While the audience is submitting their questions in the chat box, I'll kick it off with our first question. So, knowing what you know now as a fellow, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself when applying for the fellowship? And I wonder, Terence, if you might be able to share your thoughts first.
Sure, no problem at all. I think for me, I thought about this for a little bit because I think for me, coming from a non-academia standpoint, I think the key for me would have been just to be more confident in the process. I came from an industry background and business background, and when I first had learned about the fellowship, I thought it was more of something just for, professors taking sabbatical, or, something from not quite for people with my background. And I found out the more that I got into the process that, I did belong in the process. And so I think if I had to do it again, it just would have been a much more confident approach about it. It was something that I was trying, and it ended up working out. But like I said, there's room at the fellowship for a wide variety of people of different backgrounds. And so I think just doing it all over again, I just would have probably attacked it a little bit more with a little bit more confidence, because there really is room for everybody at the table at AAAS.
Thank you for kicking it off there, Terence. And for such a positive note, I just want to really echo that we have such a diverse range of fellows from so many different backgrounds, doing such incredible work across the federal government, and everybody is needed. So if you are here today, you are in the right place for this conversation and to be a potential fellow. Andrea, what are your thoughts?
A really good question. And my first piece of advice is to do what you're doing now, is reaching out to have conversations with current fellows. I think I maybe spoke to 2 or 3 fellows, but it was after I had submitted my application and prior to the interviewing process. So it like had not occurred to me to try and reach out and make connections with current fellows to learn more about the program. I just felt like, right, you write applications, you put them into the black box of the internet, and you cross your fingers that you get it. And that was probably a little naive of me, because I think having some insights on what this fellowship could actually be is something you cannot wrap your head around unless you've actually worked in the federal sector. So I just had an assumption that my background was kind of biomedical. My graduate work was funded by NIH. I'll just go work at NIH, and didn't think further than that. But I think if I had spoken with more fellows and gotten, or even just spent some time doing homework about federal agencies, I might have been able to better appreciate the opportunities that might await me, and that, my placement could end up being anywhere and still be a really good fit. And I didn't realize that until I, probably after interview week, that I could have been that flexible, or could have spent time, having more of a focused approach on, this is my policy mission. It's not just, I'm going to take my PhD to the government and voila, but, I'm on a mission to do specifically, expanding science communication, for example, is a big role in my position. And that wasn't quite the mindset I had going in. I just thought, I know science, they will place me somewhere and good things will happen, because I didn't do my homework. So I think the people who are already here in the audience are probably a step ahead of where I was.
I really appreciate what you're sharing there. And I think you're striking this balance where you absolutely, everybody has this fire in them as to why they came to this fellowship and why they're here today, and that is valid, and you have the right to pursue that and to be focused in that. And also, there are a lot of different ways that might manifest through the fellowship, and you might not know until you're interviewing or even in the fellowship position. So speaking of, John, I know you've been in a congressional fellowship and now also in the executive branch. I would love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, so I didn't really have a great idea what to expect. Going into the congressional fellowship, I knew that Congress could be chaotic. I could never have anticipated what the last year was like. But I sort of was going into it thinking, just roll with it, see how this goes. You probably can't anticipate things, and that was correct. But what I didn't expect was just how amazing the fellowship community would be. Like all of the other fellows, getting to know the other fellows, Andrea, Terence, they're amazing, and you will feel just such a sense of community I mean, I don't know about other people who are interested in the fellowship, but there are a few people in my graduate program who are interested in science policy, but it was definitely a second or third order thing that people were thinking and talking about. But being in the fellowship, everyone you talk to is excited and interested about all of the things that you've been thinking about for years. And so you'll make so many connections. It's incredible. And I would have been even more excited about the fellowship if I had known that going into it.
Thank you for that perspective, John. I love what I just heard from everybody. So I was just jotting down some notes that, this really is for everyone, and that you all have a different reason to be here today, and maybe what you might want to accomplish through a fellowship. But there are a lot of opportunities, maybe far beyond our imagination right now. But that if you are able to come and do this fellowship, you're going to have the support network of your cohort, of your fellow fellows, and also our alumni of more than 3,400 alumni network around the world, still carrying on that mission and that passion for science policy. So our first question from the chat, it's actually the collection of a couple of different questions. So I'll do my best to put them together. And the question kind of relates to work-life balance. So if we're talking about the day in the life of a fellow, could you speak a little bit to work-life balance, and if it is possible, also what it's like to have or start a family during the fellowship?
Well, I can start that one off. I know.
Thank you, Terence.
Well, to be perfectly honest, it's actually the best work-life balance I've had in probably the last 5 years, because when I was in, well, maybe the last 10 years, because even when I was in industry, I was in a upper level management position, and it required a lot of travel. I was always on the road, and I was able to balance it, but when I transitioned to having my own business, it was you work when you have to work, whether it's weekends or nights or whatever it is. And so sometimes the home life does suffer a little bit. And being in the fellowship and being in a defined position, within a government agency, there's pretty much a solid, stable work week. Moving there with my family, we were able to find a great neighborhood to live in, and John and I are neighbors, and we're neighbors for a long time. And my son loved his school, and my wife was able to work from home, and so it really turned out to be a great transition for me and my family, because it ended up being a really good work life, and being in the DC area provided us with so much opportunity for entertainment and just cultural experiences, and like John mentioned, being able to meet with the other fellows for after work dinner or happy hour or whatever it might be. It's a great experience as far as that's concerned. So it's kind of one of those 1 or 2 years, depending on if you do 2 years with the program. It's one of those periods in your life I think I'm going to look back at and be like, it was almost like just nirvana during that period, because we're not feds, we're not working permanently at the Senate or House or what have you. We're in these positions, but the responsibility level is only allowed to go so far because we're not federal employees. So it really has been a really good experience as far as I'm concerned with the work-life balance. So that's from my perspective with a family.
So I don't have a family, but I have an interesting circumstance that happened during my fellowship year. Early in the fellowship year, pre-COVID, really good work-life balance. I was able to short commute to my office, which was great. And then there are so many events happening in the DC area, not just AAAS, but other nonprofits and think tanks and museums and organizations like the National Academies are always doing seminars and workshops and networking events. And so sometimes several nights a week, I would be downtown in DC doing after work events, which was exhausting, but I figured, hey, this is my year for professional development. I'm not living with my spouse, like no one's waiting for me at home, like now is the time to do it. Then the pandemic started and everyone just now stays home. on the plus side, that allowed my husband to move in with me and change careers. So on the plus side, we're living together again. And somehow the work-life balance has shifted. My meetings are back to back to back. Thankfully, I now live with someone who can like pass me a lunch plate, over the Zoom, so I can take all of my meetings uninterrupted. So like the workday has gotten fuller, I feel, because now we don't have to get up and walk across the building to the other conference room. We can just move from one meeting to the next. And so the work will expand to fill the space you permit it. And so that I've certainly seen happen. And now a lot of those events that I used to attend in person are starting to move virtually. And so if you're not tired of sitting in front of your computer screen, there's things happening at 6 or 7 p.m. after hours with webinars and workshops and things like that, that I'm still trying to occasionally take advantage of outside of work office jobs.
Yeah, so my experience might not be typical because each congressional and Senate office is like its own small business with its own practices. But my office has a very strong culture of trying to keep work-life balance. When we are in session, which means that Congress is in and they're doing hearings and votes and things, work hours were 9 to 6, and then out of session would be 9 to 5. And sometimes like our supervisor would come into the legislative office and be like, why are you guys still here? Go home. So, and she would like get more and more insistent if it was getting past like 5 or 6 p.m. So they tried really hard, and the office is great. Since it is Congress and sometimes there are like must pass bills or appropriations requests, there are short windows where hours are longer, but it's never like just unending grind. Things did change a bit, as you'd expect with the pandemic. Constituent services became really important because we had fewer staff, because internships all had to end because students had to go home from college. And we also, at the same time, had many more constituents contacting us with questions and requests for help and things. So work increased, and so work-life balance, I would say, for a little while degraded a bit, working more like until maybe 7 or 8 p.m. But even then, the leadership in my office made sure that like forced people to take days off periodically. They're like, no, you have to take time off. Yeah, you can delay to next week if you need to get something done, but you will take time off. So some offices are great. Some offices have a different culture, but that's really, when you're interviewing, you'll find one that's the right fit for you, because some people love working all the time. And that's not wrong. It's just you finding the right fit for you.
I appreciate that point. And that point of, as you go through the interview process, and if you are in the executive branch, become a finalist, or for you, John, when you were on the Hill looking for a placement, you still do have that power and control of where you're interviewing and asking these questions to make sure something does fit with your needs in your life. Okay, another question from our chat, and this is a day in the life question of, could you describe a regular work day or work schedule? What type of tasks do you do? Are they, do you have a lot of freedom or a lot of assignments? And if it's helpful as a comparison, how did that compare to life as a graduate student or a postdoc or your previous work? John, do you want to start?
Sure. There is no typical day in a house office. I can give you an idea of the types of things that I do. I write briefing and decision memos for Congresswoman Houlihan. I also brief her, not in person anymore, but virtually on topics, so verbal briefings. I staff her at events. When we were actually on the Hill, that would be me attending the event with her, and if she had questions, she could text me about it and I would quickly look it up so that she would have situational awareness of what was going on if she wasn't up to speed on a particular detail that was being discussed. I would talk to constituents, and I do more of that now than I did before just because of the pandemic. I take meetings with interest groups and constituents. I identify issues that the Congresswoman might want to pursue, and so I will write legislation or find legislation that she might want to sign on to as a co-sponsor. I write letters to congressional leadership, agency leadership. I help draft remarks for her. So like anything, everything, you can't predict what's gonna be any given day, really.
Yeah, I hear a lot of writing, a lot of public speaking, a lot of attending meetings and having good interpersonal skills. How does that compare to what you were doing before the fellowship?
Well, I was working at a military research lab on a project where I was the lead of the project, and most of the other people, they were providing sort of ancillary services. So it was a lot of solo work, occasionally with meetings with the other people to make sure that we were still in sync, but much more interpersonal work, much more communication focus, much less technical focus. I mean, my technical background is very helpful because when I'm meeting with people on a science or technology issue, even if it isn't my field, I have the framework so I can understand it fairly quickly. And also, I find that people who come in who are scientists or engineers or other types of technologists, they seem to be put at ease by talking to someone with a technical background. Like they're comforted feeling that I will be able to get it. So yeah, it's pretty different from my previous work.
And Andrea, I see you kind of smiling and nodding along. Do you want to share next?
I would just echo what John said about, right, even if what you're working on isn't technically in your field, you can get up to speed on it quickly. So my background is in neuroscience, and prior to the fellowship, I was teaching biology to undergraduates. So day in the life was college professor. I taught a class or two a day, and the rest of my time I was either grading papers or prepping courses or trying to get some amount of lab research done with my students. Again, very sort of mostly solo work, but if I was working with students, it was me sort of self-directing. Now I work with astronomers and mathematicians and physicists and chemists. And a lot of what we do is team-based. So a day in my life now is a ton of meetings, as I alluded to, back to back. And a lot of, actually similar to what John said in Congress, it's a lot of situational awareness. In my position at the National Science Foundation, because I'm not working with grant managers on programs, I'm working in an office of the assistant director. A lot of what we do is sort of keeping our leadership aware of things, sort of high level programming, media things that are of interest, press that's coming out that, you know, is research funded by the National Science Foundation, things that might impact the National Science Foundation, and particularly our research areas. So part of my job is trying to promote the research that we funded and find a communications outlet for it. And part of it is just sort of situational awareness of all of these things that are going on for the leaders of the divisions within my directorate. So a lot of meetings, a lot of teamwork, a lot of writing, and a lot of following up on a lot of moving parts.
Our calendars are our friends nowadays. And Terence, how does that compare to the Building Technologies office and a day in your life?
Well, I mean, with us, I would tell everybody a lot depends on where you end up at, where you go. It was so odd because when we started in last September, literally the first day that we finished orientation and came into the office, I was already being told to prepare to go to my first conference the next week. I think I had a week and a half before I had to take off. And part of the reason was because the area that I work with, we do a yearly awards ceremony in conjunction with a conference that happens in Colorado, out in the Denver area. And so, so it's like, they're like, these are the people that you're going to really be working closely with while you're here. A lot of these builders, developers, and so on, energy efficiency experts. And so you have to jump right in and just go for it. But in the office, when you're in the office, the key thing is a lot of teamwork. And fortunately, being in industry, I had been used to a lot of teams, and whether it was managing teams or being part of teams, and so teamwork is a big part of it. But depending on what office you were that you're in, I know for me, the first probably 4 to 5 months, outside of spending the majority of my time with my main mentor, they really allowed me the freedom to interview technical managers all around the office, whether I worked with them directly or not, because you need to have a feel for the area that you're working in and kind of learn what the office does as a whole before you can kind of figure your piece in it. And so for me, it was like typical days might be scheduling meetings with different technical program managers, with the program office leaders, just to, like, during the first period, to really get up to speed on what I needed to be focusing on and what they needed from me. But once you get past the initial startup phase, typical days now are, kind of like Andrea and John talk about, you have a lot of meetings scheduled. For me, because we try to stay alert on developments in our particular field of our area or field. I attend a lot of webinars from different professional societies and organizations that are working in the areas that we have research interest in. And I think one of the other things that turns out to be interesting, though, is that your background might help you a lot more than you think, because I can tell you one of the main things that helped me get up to speed in our office was the fact that I had done a lot of NSF, or National Science Foundation, panel reviews in the past. And the fact that a lot of our government agencies are actually kind of, you almost consider them as funnels for appropriated money to be used for research across the country, then it really helps to understand that process of kind of how research is performed and how awards are given out through the review process. And so some of the previous experience that I had just with being exposed to the NSF award process helped me tremendously, being at DOE and going through some of the same award type processes to get basic research done. So anyway, I mean, typical days are all over the place. I mean, but today, once you get settled in, the typical day is probably, might be 2 or 3 meetings. It might be a webinar. It might be, really doing some reading. I know for me, I added a lot of news feeds in my particular area, because I want to stay abreast of any potential partners that we might want to work with or reach out to, and just staying abreast of what's going on in the industry. So yeah, so it's just it's a good mix that keeps you going and keeps you busy, keeps you interested, and so that's the way I look at a typical day at this point.
Thank you all for sharing the different perspectives, and I love hearing the different themes that emerge, the importance of your interpersonal skills and the experience you have as a scientist, as an engineer, that you do bring to bear, your communication skills, critical thinking, the leadership that you've had in various roles, whether it was teaching or a lab, or conducting research, or being an entrepreneur that you brought to bear. And I hope that these all sound familiar to people who are listening, who are applying, because those are certainly things we're looking for in our applicants. And that is one of the things that makes it maybe different from a postdoc, is that this is very policy focused. It's not necessarily research based. And that brings me to the next question for the panel, which is, do you still feel like a scientist or engineer in your fellowship role? I'll start with you, Andrea. Do you still feel like, a neuroscientist in your role?
I maybe feel less like a neuroscientist, but I definitely feel like a scientist. As I mentioned earlier, I think my technical background is sort of less important. That doesn't mean it's not relevant. The fact that I'm a trained scientist and I can understand the scientific method and I can get up to speed on technical writings very quickly. And if I'm speaking to a program officer in physics, I can have a basic understanding of the basic physics. Even if I don't understand the high level theoretical point they're making, I can understand it well enough to get my job done. And that's all the more easier done because I have a background in science. So I definitely still consider myself a scientist. And I just think it's a little bit less important, like where exactly you came from. You'll always be a scientist.
I'll keep mine short. I'll keep mine short and sweet. Yes, I feel more like an engineer now. I won't necessarily say scientist. Well, we do use the term building scientist. So yes, okay, I guess I could say that. But I do feel more like a working engineer. When I got to a certain management level, you get away from some of the day-to-day engineering duties and what have you. And so I kind of got away from that for a while. So really, yeah, I feel more like a working engineer now than I have in quite a while. So I'll just give you the short and sweet of it.
Yeah, so I'll echo what Andrea said. My background specifically hasn't applied to a lot of things. I have gotten a chance to do a little bit that's directly related to my background, but mostly it's just been an understanding of how science is conducted, a basic framework of like, this is, the basics of chemistry, and this is the basics of biology. I am a planetary scientist, but I wrote a bill on how the federal government does research on a type of chemical called PFAS, which I had never heard of before I started the fellowship. And yet I was the scientist in the office, and talking to another fellow, we came up with an idea, and from talking to more people that evolved, and eventually I had written a bill on research on a chemical I hadn't even heard of a year ago. Certainly wasn't what my doctorate was on. More specifically, related to my research, I have managed to keep a little bit of a hand in my research. In my postdoc, I wrote a computational model for plasma flows, and some people in my field are now using the model I developed. So I am still in my free time providing some consultation and advice on that. So I'm still keeping a hand in the game in the actual science side of things too.
Well, and I wonder, following on that, John, so now that you've had these experiences, now that you've helped draft that legislation about PFAS, how do you think that your experience as a fellow has informed how you think about yourself and your career in the future?
Well, I had a long-standing interest in policy. So I applied for the fellowship thinking that I wanted to do a pivot into policy as a career. And my experiences this year have just reinforced that and made me more confident that I really do want to do this longer term, while, if possible, keeping some foot in the, or one foot in the science side of things.
And if you're willing to share, Andrea or Terence, what do you think? And I know everybody's still in the middle of their fellowship, right? And so you're very immersed in this, but even just thinking abstractly, what do you, has this changed how you think?
Ladies first.
Has this changed how I think about my career goals? I think that's what inspired me to pursue the fellowship, was a shift in career goals. So my motivation was to leave academia and to do something else. And I was interested in sort of a science communication direction. And I ended up here in science policy, but I'm doing a lot of science communication. And so it's still a good fit. Sort of translating technical science for a general audience is one aspect of my job. And I do in the future hope to pursue a career where I can continue to do that. Now, whether that's for another federal agency in a position similar to the one I have now, or maybe like a science adjacent nonprofit or professional society, I'm not sure yet. But to me, I feel like I'm still going in this direction of sharing science with people so that they can think it's as cool as I think it is. I did that in the classroom. I'm doing that for the NSF, and hopefully I'll do that post-fellowship as well.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'll just concur with John and Andrea there, because for me it was also a pivot, and I had never worked in the government before, but I did have interest in it, and so the fellowship is a great career pivot, or a great potential career pivot. And I'll follow up with what Andrea said as well, is that it exposes you not only to potential careers that you could have within, particular government agencies, but I love the part that she mentioned about the kind of adjacent groups that you work with as well, because I never would have known about half of them that, deal in the industry that I'm working with now. And a lot of them have great missions and really great people working at some of the other like professional societies and groups that we work with, nonprofits and people that are doing really great work. And so it's given me exposure to that to consider as well when it comes to after post fellowship, not just but the fellowship itself, though, yes, it has interested me in a government career, which I didn't necessarily think would happen when I started, but it's definitely changed my mind on that, as well as some of the adjacent groups that we work with. So it exposes you to so much. So yeah, it's been great in that front.
Thank you all. I love hearing all of the different reasons for why people may come to the fellowship. The sense that perhaps you're looking to pivot, perhaps you're looking to explore, deepen your understanding or knowledge, or broaden your network. And maybe the results of the fellowship are expected in confirming what you're passionate about, or maybe they're really unexpected, and all of these things can happen. And I wonder, maybe reflecting a bit, if you're able, on what it was actually like to apply, when you really were applying. And Andrea, I think you started off talking about this earlier, the what would I do differently now? Could you maybe reflect on what did you include in your essays? How did you approach it? And do you have a sense of what made you stand out as a candidate at the time?
So perhaps this will make it sound worse, but to begin where I left off earlier, that I didn't do my homework when I applied. I actually applied to the fellowship twice. So I had two opportunities to do my homework and didn't either time. Yet somehow here I am. I applied to the fellowship right out of graduate school, the year I was defending, because I knew then I was not interested long-term in a career as a PI at a university. Didn't get it that first time. And so I went on to become faculty at a university for a few years, and sort of said to myself, I really need to pivot, do something else. So I applied to the fellowship again. A big difference was I was 4 years older. I wasn't fresh out of graduate school. I had a lot more time to specifically think about myself, not as, just a neuroscientist, but a neuroscientist who has taught pre-med students and who has, now published in the olfactory system and in the brain and in endocrinology. And so as a scientist, I think I was much more rounded. After sort of being independent for a few years after graduation, I had also had more opportunity to do outreach activities beyond those sort of that were pre-set by my graduate program. So if I wanted to volunteer or get involved in things going on in my community, I had to do those myself, again, sort of as an independent person postgraduate school. And so I think those built into my application, where those few extra years gave me more experience and just more eagerness, I think, to really do something else besides just the usual teach courses, do research that I had gotten used to doing. So I think I was really chomping at the bit by the time I applied the second time to try something else, to get back into a learning mindset, to just be really engaged. And I assume that came out strongly in my application, because here I am. But the difference, I think, was 4 years and a bigger fire under my butt.
Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable and being willing to put that out there, because we actually hear that a lot, and we hear that a lot of folks who apply, if they don't get it the first time, but applying again, they seem to have more success or can have success. And I think part of it is having experience with the process on our end, and also having more time to get to know oneself.
Exactly.
Terence, how about you? Do you remember what you submitted in your materials and what you think might have made you stand out?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest with you, during especially for what we had to write up, I mean, I was very personal with what I was trying to do, and I think a combination of what I wrote up as far as why I thought it was the right time to apply for the program, that in combination with my varied background, I think that, you know, hopefully attracted attention, because like I said, I kind of had, you know, kind of specific goals of what I was trying to do, but also I was very upfront about, you know, personally why I thought that I wanted to do it as far as a career pivot. And there were just circumstances in my life and my family's in my immediate family that, you know, kind of allowed me to be able to look at taking a year or two to do this. And so, you know, I was very open, you know, very open and honest about why I wanted to apply, why I thought it was a great time for me to do it. And, you know, I was very open and honest. So it wasn't anything about, you know, I want to do this so that I can work on the Hill, or that I can, start a new career with the government. It was really just kind of searching for that next option, for that next career option, and wanting to expand my horizons. And so I think between trying to take a really personal approach about it, as well as letting the committees know about my varied background that I had. I think it probably attracted them a little bit, because, you know, I didn't have the PhD or the academia career or what have you. So I really just had to just let them know, hey, this is where I've been, this is the road that I've been on, and this is why I think this is a great time and a great program for me to try to start.
Thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate that perspective of we all have a different road we're on, that we're traveling, and we're all at different points on it, and that sometimes we can feel like that is a detriment to ourselves. And in fact, it's actually what makes us so unique. And I appreciate you sharing that you kind of were really authentic about who I am and why I'm here and what I can bring and can contribute. And that stood out. It's good advice. And John.
I'm not sure why they liked my application, but I can speculate. As I mentioned, I've had a long-term interest in policy. I had the good fortune to do my doctoral work at a university and in a department where I was required to do what they called a doctoral minor, which was actually just go take 3 classes that aren't in your thesis area. And so I took that as a license to take courses in public policy and international relations. And I also was fortunate enough to be a space grant fellow and leveraged that into, hey, you're going up to DC to talk about how great space grant is and that you should keep funding it. Can I come with you? So I did congressional visits with them. And then I was meeting some other scientists who were interested, from my field, who were interested in federal relations, and through talking to them, I became a member of the Federal Relations Subcommittee for the Division for Planetary Sciences of the AAAS. And as part of the FRS, I did many more congressional visits. And then I took a postdoc in DC because I wanted to get more exposure to the policy world just by proximity. As has been mentioned, there are always seminars going on in normal times all around DC, so you can meet people and learn how things work. And so it got to the point where I had learned so much about the policy world from the outside and engaging with congressional offices and executive agencies as a scientist that I was just really wanted to know what the other side of the equation was. I had been in dozens of meetings with congressional staffers and agency employees, and I knew what it was like from the outside, but I also knew that it was probably completely different being on the other end of the equation because they have so many different concerns to balance. And so that's what I talked about in my application, how it was really, I had this background and I really wanted to see, like, you know, the other side of go through the looking glass, so to speak. So I don't know, I guess that they found that compelling because it worked.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I wonder if anybody wants to add on any more thoughts about, you, John, you were really just talking about your experience with policy before the fellowship. And I know that that can look different for everybody, and so not everybody has the same level of policy experience beforehand. Does anyone want to share about their policy experience before the fellowship? And if you didn't have any policy experience, how you got up to speed when you started?
I mean, yeah, Andrea, go ahead, please.
I can definitely tell you about getting up to speed when I started, which was learning entirely on the fly. Just learn by doing. You know, I used to always tell my students, like, you can't actually learn by osmosis. You can't just like fall asleep on your textbook and hope that you'll learn biology. But in the fellowship, it's a real thing. You are just in meetings and you absorb things like a sponge, and you just start to understand how all of the pieces are connected that, I mean, unless you were John, from the outside, you might not have realized before. So my experience was 100% just diving in head first from day one, and it hasn't stopped since. On the one hand, it's sometimes been a little bit, not awkward, but just sort of a mind shift, because I was coming from a faculty position where I had a lot of independence, and I still have independence to sort of pick my own projects. But there's a lot more interconnectedness where I need to work with teammates, I need to keep supervisors appraised, and a lot more moving parts than I was used to having in the university setting. So even just understanding the new system of how to interact within my office with all of the people who need to be involved on various parts of whatever we're working on, whether that's planning a meeting or trying to get a press announcement published, who needs to be involved at which step, and keeping all those parties happy, was a learning process. And it's actually kind of exciting to be back in a place where I'm learning constantly. That's what attracted me to science as a kid. So it's always exciting and it's always changing. And I just have to remind myself, rather than being frustrated by that, it's just novel and exciting to keep learning about all of the strange interworkings of policy.
Thank you for sharing. You're learning on the fly. Sorry, Terence.
And I'll throw on top of that, I mean, for me, it was really eye-opening, because I would tell you, I would have told you when we started that I didn't have any policy experience, but I actually had it and didn't even realize it, because there were programs that I worked with when I was doing renovations. I'll just give you an example. We would do senior citizen grants, like through the SNAP program or through weatherization assistance from DOE. We would do renovations through those programs, and you know, I love doing those because we were really helping people in the community that needed the assistance. But you know, when I started working for DOE, then I'm like, oh, okay, that's where these funds came from. You know, these different programs that we were doing. You know, I fully understand kind of the full circle now of where some of these funds come from and why it's so important that they get appropriated, and how it comes down to the ground level. So even within my office, when I was able to tell people, yeah, we did projects under these grants, and they were like, oh, you actually did the ground level work, and I'm like, yeah, and so I was extremely happy about that, because I had been exposed to to federal policy through, whether it's groups like HUD or DOE that fund a lot of these efforts, and you really have no idea. So there are programs that we participate in, almost on a daily basis that we really don't even realize how much policy touches our daily lives. So that's it for me.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say that while I had, I guess, a fairly good amount of experience from the outside, being in a congressional office, I had no idea what was going on. It was like drinking from a fire hose for months. And every time that I felt like I had sort of figured things out, some new part of the congressional year would rear its head. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on again. So it's been an incredible learning experience, even though I had had all of that policy engagement from the outside before.
I appreciate that perspective and the clarification. And I wonder for our panel, when you have those moments of drinking from a fire hose and you have those moments of learning on the fly, oh my goodness, how did I get myself here? Terence, your office sending you off in your first week. What were some strategies that helped you through those moments of discomfort or unfamiliarity as you got your footing? Terence?
For me, it was jump right in. That was the key. There was no time to really be nervous or hesitant about anything. And I will say this, the great part about being a fellow is that, especially right from the beginning, if you're, drinking from a fire hose or whatever, the thing is that you realize that, look, I'm in a learning mode, and most of the people you work with know this. So for me, it was like, it was really fun in a sense, because, okay, you're wanting to throw me right in. I'm in the mix. And so, I'm learning right from the beginning, but there was no pressure on me to, produce anything right at the beginning. I'm just strictly in a learning mode. So, excuse me, but anyway, but that was my experience, though, is that, it was good. I would tell you, jump right into whatever situation you're thrown into.
Well, to add to that, I think Terence has a point. Your office appreciates that you have just started and you need to be brought up to speed. That will happen quickly, but they're not going to leave you in the dust. So I had a lot of people in my office, right? So I was going to a lot of meetings. I was attending them with people. So after the meeting, I could ask them, okay, what was that about? Like, I took a lot of notes and don't understand half of them. I don't know these acronyms, and those people can fill in for you what you should have caught if you don't know yet. So I've had a great team of people, not just my primary supervisor, but some co-mentors I've picked up. A team of peers that I work with on a lot of projects together also were incredibly helpful of like giving me the lay of the land of how like the office functions and how to divvy up our roles. So it is drinking from the fire hose, but you're not doing it alone, because hopefully there is a support system of other staff in your office. There's probably also other fellows, if not in your office, that across your agency who can give you insights on like, yeah, it's just going to be awkward for a couple months while you learn. That's fine. Like, you'll be thrown some project, which is more an opportunity for you to learn how to do things, not necessarily for you to like produce something perfect the first time. But yeah, as Terence mentioned, it's just engaging to keep learning new things all the time. And so you just do that knowing that it's a learning process, and you will eventually have an optimized way of working. It just might take a while to figure out what that is.
Yeah, and I'll say that people are very forgiving and willing to help you, but being a fellow is great, particularly, there are lots of types of fellow, but being a AAAS fellow is great because there is, the fellowship has a reputation. So people will be willing to help you out, but they also respect you and they just assume that you have expertise in something. So, you get to both not have any idea what's going on and be respected. So it's a great situation. And to reiterate what Andrea said, having the fellowship network to ask people like, hey, I don't know what's going on here. Have you dealt with this before? It's a great support system.
Yeah, and actually I did forget about that too, that there were a lot of, like in our first year, there were a lot of second year fellows in the office. So we did have other fellows that were, just awesome to talk to and just, just figure out where things were going. Because to be honest, even the first couple of months, we were still waiting on getting badges so that we could get back in the office from going to the restroom or something. We're just, we're really just trying to figure out where things are located. So, the second year fellows were a great resource and a great help to us as well. And so, yeah, it's been great on that end.
These are all really great kind of strategies and resources to point people to if thinking about how to move past this place of, I don't know, this is unfamiliar to me. And I actually encourage anyone who is working on an application right now to use some of these tips. So, right, the jump in, don't be nervous. I think sometimes the anticipation is worse than the experience. And so I think if you just get started, you'll already be there and then you'll have a draft you're working on. And the advice of, Andrea, your point of ask questions. There are people around you. You have colleagues, friends, family, advisors, lab mates who care about you and want you to be successful. And if you know fellows, maybe know these 3 fellows on our panel, we're all here to be a resource to you and help you there, and just keep it moving forward. And that's my advice for everybody, is echoing our panel's advice. And we're approaching the end of our time together today. And I want to wrap up by asking our panelists to quickly share some parting advice. So today's theme has been what's it like to be a fellow. And I know a lot of people joining are planning to apply to become a fellow. And so I wonder, for our panel, do you have any parting advice for someone before they hit submit on that application? Andrea?
Oh, it's such a tricky question. It's such a tricky question because hopefully when you're ready to hit the submit button, you've done all of the proofreading, the carefully crafting, a beautiful narrative about how fabulous of a candidate you are. So hopefully you've done all of that. And I think at some point you just need to walk away from it and said, I've given it my best shot, and click submit.
I would totally agree with that. And just thinking back on it, you know the basics to do, because proofreading, just making sure that everything is worded the way that you think it best represents you. That was probably the most key thing. But I think at the end of the day, I did pretty much, just like Andrea said, a certain day I'm just like, okay, I'm hitting send, and it's going. And so it's I've spent a month or two trying to put this thing together, get references, researched how to write the best paper I could write, the best briefing memo that I could write. And after you put all that effort in, then at the end of the day, it's kind of like, look, hey, I'm qualified for this, so hit submit, send it in, and be done, and just wait for the results. And Andrew's proof that if you don't get it the first time, hey, look, reapply. So that I will tell you that I was very fortunate. I got it on my first try, but it was just, like I said, that is something that I don't spend any time bragging about, because there's a lot of people that have tried in 2 or 3 times, and so it's worth doing. So I would just tell you, make sure that you pursue it. If you think it's something you really want to do, I think it will be extremely worthwhile in your career.
So I guess my advice, I haven't always been able to follow because I sometimes procrastinate on applications on things like these. But if you can, try and get it to a point where you think you're ready to submit a day or 2 ahead of the deadline, and then just walk away and don't think about it for a day, enough so that it's not running through your brain in the background all the time, and then read through it again fresh, because then you'll be closer to seeing it how someone else who didn't just spend the last month crafting this thing will be seeing it. And so maybe some tweaks will become apparent to you then. So if you can, give yourself a little time to not think about it before a last look before submitting it.
Thank you all. It's wonderful advice. And yes, and if you're applying, hit submit and don't miss that deadline, which is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on November 1st. So with that, this brings us to the end of our time together. I want to thank Andrea, Terence, John, everyone who's joined us for your insightful questions. The application, like we're talking about now, is open through November 1st. And our next chat, our final chat of the series, Ask a Fellow Anything, we mean anything, will take place on October 15th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. We hope you can join us for that chat as well. And if we did not get to your question today, we're very sorry, and please send us an email at fellowships@AAAS.org. Thank you all for joining.